Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. This is Kathy, and today I'll be creating a Valentine's Day card using some more muted tones so that it has a little bit more of a masculine feel. I used the Polka Hearts background stamp from Pink and Maine, one of the sentiments from Monster Love by Concord and Ninth, and the Stacking Hearts dies from Honeybee Stamps. I started out with a piece of Neenah Desert Storm cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I used temporary adhesive just to hold it in place in my stamp platform. I treated the cardstock with my anti-static powder bag because I plan on doing some heat embossing. And I inked up the stamp using Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink, so the embossing powder will stick to it. Now, one of the things that I forgot to do before using this stamp, which it is a brand new stamp to me, I didn't condition it. So in order to get a really good impression, I did have to stamp it a couple of times on that cardstock. And again, there's nothing wrong with the stamp. I just didn't condition it. And the other thing I did was I actually put it in the stamp platform. And usually when I use background stamps, I prefer to have them stamp side up on my craft mat, and then I apply the cardstock to the stamp instead. And I'm not really sure what I was thinking when I put it in the stamp platform. It was just, I guess, kind of a habit because I do use it so much. Anyway, after I had the background stamped out, I removed the cardstock from my stamp platform and coated the image with white embossing powder from Hero Arts. I did have the heat tool heating up the whole time I was doing the stamping. That helps minimize the cardstock from warping when you actually do the heat set. To hold the cardstock down on my craft mat and so that I didn't burn my fingers, I just used my tweezers to hold it in place. After all of the embossing powder was nice and melted, I did let that panel cool off a little bit. Next, I got some painter's tape and used it as a mask on the front of the card so that I could do some ink blending. And one trick that I like to do with painter's tape so that my cardstock doesn't tear is I'll place it on the sleeve of my sweatshirt or whatever it is that I'm wearing just to remove some of the tackiness, but it's still tacky enough to stay in place while I do the ink blending. I started out with aged mahogany Distress Oxide ink, and I did use the smallest makeup blending brush that I have in my stash to do that, and ink blended over the first 2 rows of hearts. Next, I came in with Fired Brick Distress Oxide ink and ink blended over the next 2 rows of hearts. I made sure to blend up into the aged mahogany ink just so that there would be a nice seamless blend. The third color I used is Worn Lipstick Distress Oxide ink, and did the same thing, made sure that I blended up into the Fired Brick so it was a nice smooth blend. I did go over all of the inks twice to get a really good blend and to make sure that I had some really good coverage. I took a clean paper towel and wiped off the excess ink off of the embossing powder. Since it does resist the ink, it'll clean up really nicely so the white embossing powder becomes a nice bright white again. I set that panel off to the side so the oxide ink could dry really well and started to work on my sentiment. I had a scrap of dark red cardstock. I treated that with my embossing buddy bag, or the anti-static bag, and stamped the sentiment from Monster Love by Concord and Ninth using Versamark ink. I coated that with white embossing powder and heat set it until it was nice and melted. Next, I cut down the stamped panel with a stitched rectangle die and then chose a heart die to die cut the sentiment. I thought I was going to use the larger heart, but I thought that there was a little bit too much space around the sentiment and I really wanted that to be the focal image, so I chose a smaller heart instead. I ran those through my Gemini Junior die cutting machine, and then it was just a matter of putting the card together. I adhered the stamped panel to another piece of dark red cardstock, and the dark red cardstock is cut slightly smaller than the front of an A2 sized note card. I used my AdTech tape runner to adhere that down flat. Then I adhered those 2 panels to the front of a top folding A2 sized note card, and the note card is also Neenah Desert Storm cardstock. Once I had that done, I added a few pieces of foam tape to the back of the heart with the sentiment on it, put that in place, and that finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.